now 50 years since The Lucky Country was published, a book that challenged national myths about being Australian and remains a seminal text about Australia in the 1960s. The story goes that as I slept in my cot after lunch in late December 1963, my father, Donald Horne, and my mother, Mavanwi, sat on deck chairs in the small garden of their ground floor apartment, and with foolscap writing pad on knee and felt pen in hand, my father began to write a book about Australia. In many ways, my brother and I grew up with a famous book, which matured along with the rest of us, changing its outward appearance more than once, sometimes brazenly, though in later life more subdued. Still in print, The Lucky Country became part of the Australian lexicon, even if the irony was often lost. It was his first book and made Donald Horne, if not quite a household name, certainly someone whose commentary on Australia mattered. He wrote 28 books, the last a book authored with my mother, released not long after his death in 2005. The book also has some connection to the intellectual life at the University of Sydney, mainly because of what it had to say, though perhaps also because of what one reviewer called its pugnacious style. Donald Horne was born in Kogarah in Sydney South in 1921. His father was a government school teacher and his mother a homemaker, whose generosity of spirit and sociability was sensitively portrayed in the first volume of his autobiography, The Education of Young Donald. He came to the University of Sydney on a Teachers' College scholarship in 1939, enrolled in the Faculty of Arts, but was called up in 1942 to serve in the Second World War and so never completed his BA. Yet he had an energetic university student life. First, he indulged in being a quad lounger, relaxing on the sandstone walls of the cloisters of the university quadrangle, discussing the hot topics of the day. And then, as a self-described enfant terrible, he wrote for the university's literary magazine, Hermes, and its student newspaper, On Histoire, gave precocious lectures at student society meetings, and for a while was the university correspondent for the Daily Telegraph. My father described how in writing The Lucky Country, he had a continuing sensation of imaginary conversations with various people, including his philosophy professor, John Anderson. His first sighting of John Anderson was in the quadrangle. As Anderson strode past in a brown suit and a green hat, someone pointed him out as the Scottish radical who was the university's main rebel, censured in the New South Wales Parliament and by the University Senate for using expressions which transgress all proper limits. He was also a renowned atheist and a former communist. To young Donald, John Anderson seemed the most important person at the university. He was gripped by the need to know him and for a while became one of his followers. He was entranced by Anderson's literary and philosophical views. But those imaginary conversations, while writing The Lucky Country some 20 years later, engaged with Anderson's liberal, pluralist political philosophy. His argument that liberal democracy was a forum for tolerance, enabling the expression of diverse, even conflicting views within a nation, and therefore the best means to extend freedom and enterprise throughout society. In many ways, The Lucky Country captured this ideal of liberal democracy, especially in the fearlessness of its author to critique Australia's political, intellectual and business leaders. He wrote the last chapter in this chair, The Lucky Country, Living on Our Luck. Australia is a lucky country run mainly by second-rate people who share its luck. It lives on other people's ideas, and although its ordinary people are adaptable, most of its leaders in all fields so lack curiosity about the events that surround them that they are often taken by surprise. According to the rules, Australia has not deserved its good fortune. The lack of political imagination, the scarcity of effective public discussion, the unwillingness of leaders to think creatively were all criticised in the book. But there was constructive advice too, and guidance as to ways out of the quagmire and into a newly imagined future. With prosperity due to a mineral boom, Australia might loosen its ties to Britain, stand on its own feet, perhaps even become a republic. It could free itself of the notorious White Australia policy in order to do business with Japan and other parts of Asia, firm up relations with America while becoming a chief voice for oceanic nations. Government, parliament, bureaucracy, schools, universities could all be improved and traditional ways of doing things reformed to ensure all Australians benefited. Looking around my father's study at the books that line the walls to the ceiling, we can see that John Anderson was hardly the only influence. And perhaps that's why The Lucky Country still holds fascination even for younger generations. As a book of ideas, he wanted to engage Australians in a national conversation about being Australian, one broader than the usual myths of sport, hockers and surf. Well, perhaps we still need to continue that conversation.